Hey folks, I'm going to show you a few different hand stitches that you can use while you're making your dolls, plushies, puppets, finishing off in the hoop projects, anything like that. And to start off, let's talk about needle and thread just very quickly. This is a regular needle for hand sewing, and it's very short compared to my finger there. You see the size difference. For sewing dolls, puppets, and plushies, you would probably want to have a longer needle. These are doll needles and they come in different lengths and widths. This one is a thinner one, this is a thicker one, this is a longer one. So about 2.5 to 3 inches is the one that I prefer. Some people like the longer, like this is a 5 to 6 inch doll needle. Just find something that you prefer, but hand sewing with these little tiny needles can be very tedious when we're doing especially thicker fabrics. So I don't recommend the small needle like this. Go for something like these, and I'm going to choose this one here for all of the projects here. And for our thread, you could certainly use a regular sewing thread, but I like to use a heavier thread because especially if I'm going to be pulling on it, I need a thread that's very strong and thick. So you can get different ones. Look for Coats & Clark has a lot of different ones. You can use a hand quilting. That is okay to use, but it's not the strongest. That's a cotton thread. You could use a Button & Craft, which is a polyester that's thick. A heavy duty is also a good one to have. I know that Gutermann makes heavy threads like this one. This is on the Gutermann spool. Coats & Clark also has an upholstery thread, which you can use. That is more wiry, so it might be a little harder to handle. But and Sewology from Hobby Lobby also has a pretty decent heavy-duty thread that they sell. So those are different options that you have. Just get you a nice heavy thread that can handle a lot of force. And for your thread, you want to have a length that's about 18 inches long and then double that. So each side of this is 18 inches. That's a good length for your arm. You're not, you won't have too much extra thread left over. And then once you have your thread cut, and it is good to have some nice sharp little scissors to cut the ends off nice and clean, then you can thread your needle. And let's get a little closer for this. And the easiest way to thread the needle is to have just a little bit of thread poking out from between your fingers and bring the needle to the thread. Like that. Then go ahead and pull it through, and because we're using the double thread, we need to go ahead and knot that off. And I like to tie 2 knots. Okay, so we've got 2 knots in there. I've got my long needle on one end and my double heavy thread on the other. And let's start out with a running stitch. The running stitch is one of the easiest stitches. You just start on what would be the back side of your fabric and poke the needle through. Go ahead and pull that knot all the way to the surface, and then you just go up and down from front to back. So up from the bottom and then down. It's exactly what you would think of when you're sewing. This is the running stitch. See how I get that little knot in my thread? That's okay. Just go ahead and unknot that and continue. And to speed up the running stitch, it's easier to just kind of go with this long needle. Just go through several times and pull it through, and that works as well. And see how that's looking? Now I'll go ahead and finish this off. And that's the running stitch on a circle. I've started at one side, gone all the way around back to the other side, and you can see it looks the same on both sides. That's the running stitch. Now, as far as how long should you make each stitch, that really depends on what you're doing. If you're doing something like gathering, you could leave longer stitches. If you're really trying to hide your stitches, you want to make them shorter. And for the running stitch, you could use this for creating seams. You could use it on straight pieces too, and you could do gathers. So once I've got my running stitch, and just gather that up, and you see that's how you make a ruffle with a running stitch. It's a very easy way to do that. Here's another running stitch that you can use for gathers, and in this case, this is just a triangle that I have here with a flat seam open on the bottom, and you can actually turn this flat edge into a circular edge by gathering that up, and then when you tuck the excess fabric in, you can get kind of a flat bottom. And this can be used on the bottom of dolls. You could use it on gnomes, plushies, and things like that. And now we have more of a circle where we had just a flat. And then you could set that down. You see how flat that can, you can put some weighted pellets or something in the bottom there, and then just do the tack stitch and knot this off. I can also gather in the circle here and just start pulling on that. And this is how we make the noses for gnomes. Just put a little bit of stuffing inside there. That's too much. And pull that tight, and we're going to be left with something that's shaped kind of like a ball. This is a small one. And for the next stitch, the tack stitch, I'm going to keep working on this little round nose that I made. The tack stitch is just kind of tacky stitches back and forth. I'm going to go through one side and out the other, just like this. And this is just to secure one item to another. Like if you're stitching on an arm, you could use this. If you're stitching a nose closed or something, it doesn't really matter how it looks because the tack stitches are going to be hidden when we're finished. And they're just kind of willy-nilly stitches. There's nothing measured or anything perfect about this. So that's the tack stitch. And I like to do it like if I'm doing a nose like this one, I do a few tack stitches just to hold that in place. And then I would knot that off, and I'll show you the knot at the end. A whip stitch is used to join two pieces of fabric together to make a seam, or you could also use it to close up an opening. And for the whip stitch, you just go in, and I've got two different pieces of fabric here that I'm going to stitch together and create a hand seam. And you just curl it around and then go back up through that side again. So you can see my pink fabric is on the bottom and the cream color is on top. So I'm always going to be going up through the pink from the bottom. And then same thing, go down. Whatever you decide your stitch length should be. I'm going to use about, these are pretty wide stitches for the demonstration so that you can easily see them. But again, you would want them to be shorter if you want to really hide that seam and hide the thread. So the whip stitch is always coming up from one side to the other, and then you just kind of travel down the length of the fabric like that. So that's what a whip stitch is going to look like, and if you turn that right side out, then it has like a seam here. And if you had this tighter, and if you had your stitches smaller, then you wouldn't see that thread as much. So that's what the whip stitch looks like. The stitch that you're going to run into the most often with sewing dolls and plushies and puppets is the ladder stitch, and it's used for closing your openings. So after you've turned and stuffed, and then you just kind of pull the edges here to get that excess to go inside like that, and that's how you're going to go ahead and ladder stitch it. So for the ladder stitch, I've got my thread with my knot at the end. I'm going to come up through the bottom. And one thing that I will show you, this is a little trick. If you want to, you can go through your seam on the inside and then pass your needle through the loop. Actually, it's at the knot here, so let me straighten that out so you can see. Just pass it through one time, and that will create a loop plus the knot, and so it's very secure there. That's not going anywhere. And now we can go ahead and do our ladder stitch. So I'm going to come up from wrong side to right side. And you want to start your ladder stitch right around where your seam ends. This is the seam that was done on the sewing machine or the embroidery machine. And you come straight across from one side to the other, go straight in that way, and take a little bite out of the fabric. Now I'm not going to pull that tight yet so you can see how this works. And then again, you want the thread to go straight across and go right through that edge. See how it's starting to look like parallel lines like railroad tracks? Or I guess that would be the wooden supports under the railroad tracks. And you just keep doing that, and if you need, like if you lose your place and you don't know where the stitch line should be, just go ahead and push that back in again. If you want to clip or pin this together to hold your place, that's fine. And just keep going from one side to the other until you've got the entire opening closed. We'll speed through this so you can see how this works. Okay, so I finished my last stitch. Now I'm going to press down to get that fabric to go inside, and as I pull, and you would be doing this as you go along. You wouldn't want to wait till the end like me unless you're doing a demonstration. I got a little loop right there that I'm trying to get rid of. There it is. Okay. And when you pull it, it should be nice and tight, and you should be able to get it pretty straight, although if you're doing this on stretch fabric, you will notice that stretch fabric will have kind of a zigzag pattern to it, and there's really not much you can do about that unless you add stabilizer under your stretch fabric. And then to knot this off, I'm going to do a surface knot. I'm just going to take a small little stitch here. And you would, of course, want to match your thread to your fabric as best you can. I'm using this bright red because it shows up on the fabrics that I'm using. So I've taken a stitch and I've got a loop, and I'm going to pass my needle through the first loop, which makes a second loop, and guess what? We're going to pass the needle through that second loop. And then use your needle to hold that loop up. You don't want it to get all knotted up. Hopefully you can see this. And then just slowly pull the thread until that loop knot is right on the surface. See that? Now if you had a thread that were matching, it wouldn't be as standing out like this. And then just poke your needle back through, come out several inches away, and pull on that thread. Now some people like to bury the knot inside their plushie or stuffy, and if you're using a thick thread, it's going to be really hard to get that knot buried in there. But I did go through the seam and it's kind of hidden, and again, if my thread were the same color as my fabric, it wouldn't be that obvious. And then we just cut it off next to the surface, pull tight on your thread, clip, and the thread goes back inside. So that's how we do a surface knot when we're finished stitching. Here's a tip for you. If you're having a hard time with the thread, if it keeps getting tangled up on itself and giving you trouble, a thread conditioner, this one's called Thread Magic. There are other brands out there. This is a wonderful thing to have when you're hand stitching. You just run your thread through it like that. It's just like, they're made of different things like paraffin or beeswax. Sometimes there's oils in them, but it should not stain your fabric. I've never had an issue with that. But it makes the thread just a little bit stiffer and less likely to get all tangled up on itself. So if you have a lot of problems with hand stitching, with the thread getting all unruly on you, definitely try a thread conditioner. I use the Thread Magic. I've had this a long time. It lasts forever, but that's my tip for hand stitching too. I do use this about half of the time that I'm hand stitching. I'll remember to use it, and sometimes I don't remember until after the thread is getting weird and tangly on me, and then I remember. Okay, that's all I have for how to do hand stitching, especially for dolls, puppets, and plushies. We covered what kind of needle and thread you should use. We talked about how to thread your needle and use a double thread, double layer of thread, and knot at the end. We did the running stitch, we did a tack stitch, we did a whip stitch, and we did the ever popular ladder stitch. And then at the end, I showed you how to do a surface knot. And we also talked about the thread conditioner if you want to try that. Hopefully that helps you with your hand stitching. Again, practice makes perfect with all of this, so get you some needle and thread and just try it out and see how it goes. I do have a free one-page file that you can print out that shows diagrams for all of the stitches that I covered here. So if you want to go down to the description box, if you're on YouTube, or on my website, ballyhoocreations.com, you can find that one-page printable that has the diagrams for the, what did we do, like 4 different stitches here. So hopefully that helps you out too.